Here's an interesting quote I came across in Ontario there. It's talking about hurricanes on the East Coast. So I think people have been so severely affected by the damage of Hurricane Camille that it will take several generations for a sense of complacency to develop. Unfortunately, he was wrong, because people redeveloped, and then along came Hurricane Katrina. And a lot of the damage that was done during Katrina, they're rebuilding again. But the U.S. president at the time said they're going to make the dikes as good as they were before. You gotta give your head a shake on that. Getting back up into Canada here, Toronto, October 15th, 16th, 1954. Recent heavy rains that occurred there, around 8 inches of rain, essentially caused devastating floods through the Toronto area, killing 81 people and leaving thousands of people homeless. Taught Toronto a valuable lesson: never build on a floodplain. As a result of that, they came up with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, as well as other authorities throughout the province. And they designated, within Toronto, they designated the Rouge, Don, and Hamburg River parkways. And that park system was designed as floodways to let the water get out. In addition, in Toronto, now you're not allowed to discharge your stormwater on the ground surface and into storm drains. It now has to be kept on your land to slowly infiltrate into the ground and not spike up the storms that are going down the river systems.
Is that true for residential as well?
That's all through Toronto. The only people who are allowed to discharge into the storm sewers are the people who live at the crest of gullies. Wow. Everyone else has to take care of their stormwater on their own property. Challenging task. But yeah, they had to kill 81 people before changes like that occur. And again, back into BC again, the federal and provincial agencies, as well as provincial associations such as the PEG BC, are trying to make strides towards getting regional districts, cities, municipalities, and people in general thinking about flood hazard and risk management. And in doing so, they prepared a very good document as a good first step, the Flood Hazard Area Land Use Management Guidelines. One interesting thing about this guideline, the citizens of Salmon Arm, through their elected officials, have never been given an opportunity to vote and elect to adopt that guideline. So nobody here, through their elected officials, has been given an opportunity to whether or not the city should adopt that. Other cities and municipalities around British Columbia have adopted that. It's in their OCPs, in their bylaws. Inside the city of Salmon Arm, no one's actually been given a chance, because the elected officials have never, that document has never been tabled for the elected officials to vote on after 8 years.
Calvin?
Yep.
Would it be reasonable to presume that a city like Salmon Arm, that the staff would know that such a thing existed, or could it
The staff is aware of the document,
yeah,
and they don't know why it's never been tabled, according to an email from staff that I received about a year ago. They don't know why it's never been put forth in front of any Salmon Arm council to vote on. And that particular document there is referenced in legislation. It's a legally binding document.
It's part of a package of things that were not picked up by this Salmon Arm in particular. Some municipalities do. There's flooding, there's riparian areas regulation, and fill deposition. Those are the three things that we're aware of, and I'm sure there's others.
Yeah. There's some interesting articles here. A PEG BC article, December 2009, an appeal for flood risk assessments in Canada. Essentially, it says we should be looking at the risk, not just, here, you want to develop on the floodplain, make sure your building's this high. And by making sure your building's this high, if you put in a road system that sends all the water to your neighbor, apparently that's going to be his problem, because nobody else is going to deal with it. It's not really the way to manage things. Or if you're going to put a hole through a road system and send all the water from your property to your neighbor's property, and he didn't build that high because he didn't have a height limitation at the time, and he's built behind an artificial dike called a road, and you send the water into his place, that's his problem. It's not really a neighborly thing. Gilbert White, 1920s, a very prominent hydrologist, states there that floods are acts of God, but flood losses are largely acts of man. When you put something of value in harm's way, it isn't the flood that causes the problem. It's the person who put themselves in that position, or put their values or interests in harm's way. One of the other things that is happening around the country as well as around the world is public education. People are starting to realize that floodplains and deltas do a lot. They help to purify water that goes into our lakes. They help to clean water. You know, and these things here are so effective in cleaning water. I believe there's not a treatment system in the world that can treat water for the price and effectiveness that nature can. Nature does an amazing job of treating water, and for the most part, it doesn't cost us a penny. The flood hazard and risk management. I put this slide together a few years ago. It's we refer to as a Venn diagram showing how everything interacts, the dynamics of things on floodplains and deltas. And essentially, a couple of the interesting things is the water that comes in at one end is a controlling variable. You can't push the water back uphill. And the water that comes out at the other end is also the two limits of things. Everything else inside the system that happens, whether naturally or not naturally, all have the ability to interrelate with each other to cause flooding and all kinds of unfortunate activity, as well as beneficial activities also can occur as a result of this dynamics that happens on floodplains and deltas. So the Salmon River at Salmon Arm, a case history, called Part 1. This is actually just a simple elevation map that's color-coded. Anything in the light red and lower is at risk. And if you're familiar with Salmon Arm, you realize there's a lot of pointer here. Oops. They're in the dark. At least I know how that one works now. Well, that one works now too. Ah, there's the pointer. So anything in the red, or anything below the red, in the light red and other colors there are all at risk of flooding. And unfortunately, we have a significant amount of development in this area of Salmon Arm that's at risk. So if we go backwards a bit as a case history, the railway started constructed through Salmon Arm in 1885. This is a shot of it, most likely coming across the Salmon River floodplain. It's a picture of McGuire Lake in 1890. Not a lot happening there. One old farm building and a little bit of clearing, but not a whole lot of concern as far as what if things flooded. 1900, after the railway came through, a few more interesting things started to appear, mostly development concentrated close to the railway tracks. And that's again looking out towards Fly Hills. And one of the things you'll notice there, this very conspicuous notch in Fly Hills, which everybody sees from town.
Do you know where those buildings are in terms of today's layout?
Those are down close to the railway and what they referred to as Front Street at the time, which I think is Lakeshore. So it's down in that area.
It's interesting that the slope there looks like it's had a forest fire on it.
Yeah, and actually I did hear some stories from the First Nations there that it was not uncommon for that area to be burned as intentionally, as it was a prominent area for berry picking. And if you allow it to grow up too much, the berries don't come in as nicely. I forget, one of the ladies was talking to me about that not too long ago, but that was a very good berry picking area. But also since then, we know that it burns about every 20, 30 years anyway. Yeah. So you can see in this photograph here of 1910, a lot of changes occurred. We have, again, our railway tracks coming through here. I think these are the cluster of buildings you could see earlier. And now we have a highway embankment off in this direction as well. As we move a little further along, another shot here from 1910, you can see the railway and then the highway embankment. Not a lot of development to the west of Shuswap. One of the interesting things about 1911, there's our railway and our highway embankment, and we have substantial flooding in 1911 here, and that's right in where Piccadilly Place Mall is. Or sorry, that's Centinoka Mall. It's underwater in 1911. But for the most part, the development is kept back away from that. Then we move on to another shot in 1911 there. Water level, there is a dock there, which I think was used for one of the paddle wheelers. It's a fair bit of water backed up in that area as well. 1918, the Memorial Arena shows up as a good landmark for the next few slides. But again, not a lot of development down in the low-lying areas to the west of Shuswap. 1920, again, a fairly good picture. Concentrated development in this area, not a lot of development down below. So the early settlers and people establishing Salmon Arm realized that that park wasn't a good place to build because it flooded quite regularly. So now we get to, again, this is sometime in the 1920s. There's the Memorial Arena, and there we got some substantial flooding in behind the arena. So here's what getting off to a larger scale and moving a little bit to the west of town. You can see here, there's what the Salmon River looked like in the late 1920s. It's about 26, 27. You can see it's got quite an interesting meander pattern through here. There's the highway bridge. The highway bridge is actually in here now. This is the old alignment that now has a pedestrian bridge on it here. And you can see how dynamic the river system was here. And for interest's sake here, this is 30th in the Trans-Canada, and that area there is the Braden and Johnson sawmill, which was actually using the Salmon River for the transport and storage of logs. As you can see here, again, this is just a close-up of the same area. There's numerous oxbow channels, meander channels. The rivers, you can see quite plainly, has been quite dynamic all the way across this area here, and on both the north and south side of the highway. So 22nd July 1928, moving a little bit further to the east here again, you can see development on Shuswap, predominantly to the east. Development in this area here, 10th and 10th, it's all farms. So 1967, you can see we have the Jackson campus here, this line there, the Memorial Arena here. Not a lot of development to the west of 30th, even as far back as near as 1967. 1970, you can see we've got a little bit of flooding here. Same fairly sparse development in this area, starting to pick up a little bit in this area where the Piccadilly Mall is now situated in here, I believe. But you can see obvious flooding in that area, which is also, I think, also part of the Piccadilly Mall. Then we move to 72, and I apologize for the quality of this photo. I could have done a lot better with an original. 72 was one of the bigger flood years. That was, I believe, around the top of the Lady's Head. So in 1972, the wharf is underwater. A lot of the foreshores flooded out. This is where the Piccadilly or Centinoka Mall is. This is actually the, I guess it used to be the Best Western, but now the Coast or whatever it is down in that area. There's a substantial amount of water there. This area over in here, where we're closer towards Centinoka, our Piccadilly Mall is underwater. Substantial flooding in this area, as well as all through here. Lots of water in there. And actually in 72, some of these stream systems up in here flooded, and downtown was actually a substantial amount of water right downtown for anyone who was living here in '72. And part of that water in downtown is because so the downtown core in around Ross Street is actually lower than the mean high water level of Shuswap Lake.